Today we're going to do something a little different, and I'm going to take you behind the scenes and show you what my animation process is and what steps I go through to get an animation finished. So let's get started. First off, I'm going to show you something that's very important that a lot of people probably don't think about, and that is organization. So let me open up my folders here. So I'm going to just show you what I do. In my pictures folder, I have a folder called Art. Inside Art, I have a folder called Animations. Inside Animations, I have my finished animations, as well as a Work in Progress folder. And in that Work in Progress folder is all the maps that I'm currently working on, or different animations that I'm working on. So let's go into the Ready As I'll Ever Be file. So here's where I keep all my things related to Ready As I'll Ever Be. And that comes to references, that goes to BGs, that goes to storyboards, the animation files, and all that. So let's open up the animation folder and take a look at how I begin my animation process. So here is the rough animation that I have done. Let's take a step back and look how I go about doing my storyboard in the first place. So let's hide all these beautiful layers. So here is the very first kind of storyboard that I made for this part. So I consider this the thumbnail stage of my animation. So I start off by just doing very, very rough placeholder drawings to kind of get an idea of what I want the actions and what I want to happen in my part. So as you can see, it's just very crude. I kind of wanted to get the eye color in there to see when I wanted her eyes to change. I did a sort of zoom in here just to show that I wanted to zoom in. I also have some writing on top, just so I kind of have an idea of what I want. And then from there, I clean up those in a way and refine those drawings a bit more. And I turn that into a more cleaned up storyboard with rough backgrounds and stuff as well. So here, these are just pretty much cleaned up versions with a few more poses from the earlier stage. This gives me more to work with when doing the animation, and these are pretty much what I consider my animation keys, which are my key storytelling drawings, so I need to make them as good as I can so that I can work off them and animate off of them. So now let's head back to the animation, and I will give you a little bit of an idea of how my thought process went while animating this part. So I first started off by drawing these foreground cats, just to kind of add some interest to the scene and a little more urgency to the situation around. When it came to Dovewing in the background, which will hide these other layers in the back just so you can get a better look at Dovewing. So taking a look at Dovewing here, you can see that there's different colors. There's the blue for the body and the red for the head. I animated her body, her head, and her lip sync on 3 different layers. The body doesn't move very much, so I only have a couple frames toward the end where it actually shifts in drawings just to make it seem like it has some movement and that it's not just completely still, to give it some interest. As for the lip sync, I usually add the lip sync very last, because the most important thing to sort out first is how you want the head to move. After that, then you can go ahead and deal with lip sync. So the next scene, I did a very similar thing. Her head, body, and lips sync is on a different layer. I even have the leaves, of course, on a different layer, but I also have this fur that's moving around on a separate layer as well. So at the very last shot, I keep some of these body drawings stay pretty still. And so as the wind picks up, I have her fur kind of blowing in the wind. And I have that on a separate layer so I can keep the body as one drawing and just change the fur shapes. And as you can see in this last shot, we have lots of different colors going on here. So the blue is her main body outline, which isn't moving, and the red is the fur that's blowing in the wind. I also have her lip sync on a separate layer and her eyes on a separate layer. I do this because sometimes I want different timing, like sometimes with her eyes I have it mostly on ones, which means that there's a new drawing every single frame instead of every 2 frames. And for her fur, it was a cycle, so I wanted to be able to copy and paste it like 3 times to do a cycle. And of course we have this leaf on a separate layer as well. And as for the animation itself and the principles and stuff, there isn't too much going on. This is a very simple animation with just head movements. The most important things that I kept in mind while doing this animation was following the arcs of her head, making sure that her nose was always following an arc, as well as her ears and every other part of the animation. And as for her eyes, something I like to do when it's a very emotional scene, or if someone opens their eyes very fast, is there's called an overshoot and settle, which is where she opens her eyes very large, and then they kind of settle down into a small, kind of lower. She lowers her eyelids a bit. That's a very helpful animation principle to follow for a bunch of different things. It's good for very fast movements where like someone shoots something, like they shoot their arm out and then it settles into the position it actually wants to rest in. So that's mostly it for the rough animation process. So let's move and see how I handle my cleanup. So I did all my rough animation, storyboarding, etc. in TVPaint. And to do cleanup, I've moved over into Harmony. And so this is my cleanup file. I'm gonna add a color card on so you can see better. So I'm not going to go into the specifics of ToonBoom and how it works, but I'll just let you know that what I usually like to do is I like to have my line art on a separate layer. I like to have my color on a separate layer. Which unfortunately in this file, in ToonBoom, I haven't found out an easy way to do that yet, so that wasn't done for this animation. But I was able to render them out separately, luckily, so I could do it that way. But let's also take a look at then how I cleaned up. So like I did in the rough animation, I put her head and her body on separate layers. And at the end here, I had, of course, the 4 different layers: her eyes, the fur, the mouth, and her body that just stays still. And then another thing that's very kind of, at least something that I think I do kind of uniquely, it's just something that I like to do when it comes to shading and stuff. So I have a gradient on her body, which turns into a multiply layer in After Effects. And I have my highlighting and shading all on separate layers. And of course I have all the different layers for like the green screen, the foreground cats, and all that. And so basically just putting things on a bunch of different layers is very helpful when it comes to animating, so that you can do things at different speeds and just have a better way to organize it so you're not looking at everything at once. And then of course I have that leaf at the end, which I ended up shading just to give it a little more interest. And so I'll show you how I render those files, and back to my folders here. I have a file called Renders, and these are all the different folders for the different elements that I render and put into After Effects. So I have the base color, I have the line art, I have the shading, the highlights, the gradient, the foreground leaves, the background leaves, and the cats that run across the screen. The cats that run across the screen I have separated into a bunch of different, like cat 1, cat 2, cat 3, cat 4, cat 5. It looks just black right now because PNGs usually show up black, but you can kind of like, probably can't really see too much, but since the cats are dark, you can't really see them on the black background of the PNG, which isn't actually there, of course, when you look at it. So now, after that, let's take you into After Effects, where I compile all my animation. So here we are on the beautiful After Effects file. You can see I have all my files and everything on the side here. So let's open up the composition file. So here's where things really start to come together. I add in the background, which I did in Photoshop. I added in the foreground cats and added a motion blur to them. And when it comes to Dovewing, let's look into her composition, which I have separate for her shading since there's a lot of layers here that I don't want to bog up my other composition. What I like to do with my shading and highlights is I'll have two separate layers. I'll duplicate the shading and highlights. And I'll have one, here, which one is this? Down here. So I'll have one that's blurred and one that's not. So this one is the one that's not, and then you can see that this is the blurred one here. And then that's the one that's not blurred. So I do this to kind of give things a bit of a glow effect, because I don't like having just a strictly blurred shading or highlight. To me it just looks like it looks a little drowned out and a little airbrushy, which I'm not much of a fan of. Like that just looks too soft to me. So I like to have a little bit of hardness by having a separate layer to give it a little more of a crisp outline, but also have a little bit of that glow still. Then of course I have the gradient from earlier, and I just have it on the lower opacity and on multiply. And then I have her shading. So her shading is very minimal in here. Usually I'll do more shading and less highlighting, so it's kind of opposite of what I did for this one. But since I wanted more of a dramatic lighting effect, I did more lighting than shading for this one. So I'd add the shading just to add a little more depth to Dovewing. And with that, once everything's all put together, I add some color correcting modules, which are curves. It's called a curve editor. And I edit the color curves to make everything kind of fit together with the background nicer. This just gives everything a bit better blending together so that everything looks like they all belong in the same environment. And then of course, this last file, the part with the trees, is a very large part of the animation, so I won't go to that one because it might take a while to load. So yeah, once that's done, I render everything out in After Effects, and I like to put everything together in a separate tab here called YouTube, which is where I do all the repeats and where I'm going to be adding, of course, this video. So I hope that kind of explained to you guys what my process is like, and I hope you guys enjoyed learning a little more. If you have any questions, make sure you leave them down below. And as always, I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video and creating more map parts for you guys. Thanks for listening. Hope you found this interesting. See you guys later. I also want to take a second to thank my wonderful Patreons for supporting me these past 2 months. We got Kaiden Lundquist, Rosaline Productions, Beth Hughes, Emald, Fox the Red Cat, Kayla, Silver Extreme, Hawk, and of course my beautiful $20 patrons, Amnesia Moon and Cryptic. Thank you guys so much for the support so far, it really means a lot. If any of you guys out there are interested in supporting me, there are links down in the description for my Patreon, or you can just support me with a one-time donation with the Ko-fi link down below. Thanks again guys. Blue Maroon out.